house was just down from what we call Dead Man's Curve. There are a lot of accidents there, usually in the spring and winter. In the spring of 1963, about 3:30 a.m., we're all awakened by a woman screaming, "Help me, help me." My mother, grandparents, and myself all met in the living room. The woman's voice was very loud. We all assumed there had been another car accident up on the curve. It was extremely foggy that night, so much so that you could not see more than 4 to 5 feet in front of you. My grandfather grabbed a flashlight and headed towards the woods across the road to search for the woman in distress. In the meantime, she is still screaming, "Help me." My mother called my uncle who lived just down the road. He too joined in the search and heard the woman's screams. After a good 15 minutes, my grandfather came back to call the county sheriff department to send a car out. One car came, then 2, then 3. They combed the woods in search of the woman's voice that slowly became weaker and weaker. Finally, as the sun came up, her voice had completely faded. They never found her, a car, or any evidence of any kind. I remember standing in our driveway, hearing the police officers telling my grandfather that this was best kept quiet, not to tell anyone, because no one would believe this. They decided they were not going to file a report, even though they too had heard the screams. My grandfather searched that woods every day for weeks to see if he could find any signs of any kind, but nothing was ever found. We moved out of the area in 1976 after my grandfather had died, and I often wonder if the people that lived in the old brick house ever heard the screams of an unknown woman on foggy spring nights. It was late October 1970. Halloween was only a few days away. I'd woke up feeling a bit odd. I couldn't put my finger on what was bothering me, but as the day went on, I became more worried and anxious. My mother was in the kitchen doing dishes, and I went out to talk with her about how strange I was feeling, and she told me it was nothing more than me being pregnant, and that sometimes pregnant women just get those weird feelings from all the hormonal changes going on. I insisted this was not the problem. I told her I was afraid, but I didn't know what I was afraid of. I just felt something bad was going to happen. She laughed and told me nothing bad was going to happen. As the day went on, the fear grew. I became a real mess and begged my mother not to go to work that night. Once again, she told me I was being silly and to knock it off. She said she was not going to take off work. I was close to tears when it was time for her to leave at 11:30 p.m. that night. I didn't know what I was afraid of, but it was a feeling of dread and fear I'd never experienced before. I walked my mother out to the car, through the breezeway to the attached garage. As she pulled out of the garage, I pulled the garage door down and locked it. I then went through the house, locked all the doors, pulled down all the windows and locked them. I put the chain on the lock on the basement door, checked on my grandmother, who was sleeping in her room with our dog Happy laying at the foot of our bed. My daughter was sleeping in my bed, and I decided to call one of my girlfriends since I was too afraid to go to sleep. While I was on the phone, I noticed the wind had picked up and started to rain. I could hear the autumn leaves rustling about and the branches of shrubs rubbing against my bedroom window. I continued talking with my friend and asked her if she could come out, but her husband was not home from work yet, so she didn't have a way to get there. At that moment, I saw a shadow of a person's head go past the window. I told my friend. She said it was probably nothing more than shadows from the branches blowing in the wind. I said, "Yeah, you're right. I'm just letting my imagination run wild here." but I did tell her if I screamed, she was either to call my uncle who lived down the road or call the sheriff's department. She laughed and said okay, and asked for my uncle's phone number. Right after I gave her the phone number, I heard someone walking into the bathroom, which was right next to my bedroom. It spooked me a bit, but figured it was my grandmother. I decided to check to make sure. As soon as I opened my door, I could see my grandmother and Happy were still laying in the exact same spot when I first went to my room. I walked into the bathroom. Nothing was there. I looked out the window and saw it was still raining. Everything seemed fine. I went back to my room, picked up the phone, told my friend that was weird. Grandma and Happy are still lying in the same exact positions. Neither one has moved. Right after I told her that, I heard the footsteps in the bathroom again. About that time, my 12-month-old daughter woke up. I told my friend to hang on. I was going back to the bathroom. I took my daughter by the hand, and as we walked into the bathroom, I noticed the shadow curtain was moving, and the bathroom window was wide open. Even the storm window had been locked. I wanted to scream, but I knew I had to stay calm not to scare my little girl. So I said, okay, honey, there's nothing in here. Let's go back to bed. We walked out, and as soon as I got around the corner and into the room, I slammed the bedroom door closed and screamed, someone's in the house. Call the police. Naturally, that scared my baby girl. She crawled up on the bed, scurried to the corner up against the headboard. She was sitting there crying. About that time, the doorknob started turning. I threw myself against the door trying to keep the intruder out and was screaming, he's trying to get in here. I was terrified for my baby and myself, an unborn child. I thought I had a pretty good chance of holding him off, since the glass doorknob had fell off some time ago, and it was quite tricky to get the door open from the outside. Well, I was wrong. The door was opening. I was using all my strength to push the door closed, but I couldn't hold. The door was open about 6 to 8 inches, and then this great force pushed so hard, I slid 7 feet across the hardwood floor. I ran to the window, flipped the lock, opened the window, screaming bloody murder, when I was hit in the face with the bright light that blinded me. I was hysterical now. I then heard my uncle's voice. I screamed, he's in here. My uncle crawled through the bedroom window. It didn't see anyone in the room. He said he had been trying to get into the house, but everything was locked up. I kept saying he's in here. My uncle and I searched the whole house, closets, underbeds, in every corner, basement. Nothing was there. We walked back towards the hall and bedrooms, and there was my grandma and dog laying in the exact same place, still sleeping. They never moved. We went back towards my room, and there in the doorway was a 12 to 8 inch high, perfect cone-shaped pile of dirt. It definitely felt like no dirt I've ever felt before, though. I asked my uncle how did that get there, and what is it? He said it looked like dirt, and was quite puzzled how it got there. He then said if I was you, I would sweep it up and throw it in the trash. I asked him to spend the night, but he refused and said everything was fine and I didn't need to be worried. Yeah, right. When you feel like there's an intruder that was trying to get into your house, why would you think otherwise? As he was getting ready to leave, my girlfriend and her husband pulled into the driveway. I was so glad they came out and stayed until my mother got home from work. The strange thing is, it had been raining all night, and there were no traces of mud anywhere in the house. The bathroom window that had been opened was closed and locked when my uncle checked the bathroom. It could only be locked from the inside. My grandmother and dog never once woke up during any of this. Happy was a collie shepherd mix. It was a protective watchdog. My girlfriend did call my uncle and came out as soon as her husband got home from work. She heard my screams. They both saw the cone-shaped dirt in my doorway. Was this an unseen force? Where did that strange silky dirt come from? When I was holding the door shut and it was starting to open, why didn't I see anyone's hands? How was I pushed 7 feet across the floor with such great force? This has always been a mystery to me. Many strange things happened at the house here in Granger before and after that, but this one has always bugged me the most. A while ago, when I was about 15 years old, I dozed off on the very comfortable couch on our sun porch while watching TV. I woke up after about an hour and looked out the door to the backyard and saw a dark shadowy figure standing, looking into the window on the door. It was one of those doors where half is window. I didn't see a face, let alone eyes, just a black mass that looked like the shape of a big man. I was experiencing sleep paralysis at the time, so I was unable to get up, or even make a noise. Not that it would matter. I was home alone. I looked at the other end of the couch and saw a bright light. It didn't exactly make me calm, although I got the feeling it was there to protect me. Neither the shadow or the light moved. They just stood there motionless. I felt the only way to escape this was to ignore it and fall back asleep, so I did. When I woke up 20 minutes later, there was nothing in the window or at the other end of the couch. I realized I needed to let our dog out, since it had been a while, so I called her to the front door and let her do what she needed to do. I looked across the street and saw the shadow again. I know it wasn't a person, because people walk up and down our street all the time, and this just wasn't the same. I blinked my eyes, and then it was gone. I hadn't experienced this again until very recently. My sister asked me to dog sit for a couple of weeks while she was away for job training. The dogs had a very strict schedule. They had to eat breakfast at about 8 a.m. and go for a 2-mile walk by 9 a.m. I'm the type to sleep till about 10, so during the time I found myself taking lots of naps. One day I woke from my nap and it was 11 a.m. Again, experiencing sleep paralysis. She has glass sliding doors that lead out to a dock and then to the backyard. I was facing the glass doors when I woke and saw the same dark figure that I saw 10 years earlier at my mother's house. This time, there was no bright light. It was a rainy day, and I thought it couldn't be the same experience again. I must be dreaming. The dogs didn't seem fazed by the dark man standing at the door. Maybe it's the neighbor. Maybe it's the handyman. But it wasn't. The figure just faded away. I didn't remember anything after that. I must have drifted off to sleep. When I woke, it was time for the dogs to go outside, so I reluctantly went to the sliding doors to let the dogs out, and neither of them would go. They seemed to be afraid of something. From then on, when the dogs followed me to the bathroom, the shower was in the bathroom in my sister's room. They always seemed to be agitated by something. Still not sure what though, and my sister hasn't noticed anything strange. Could someone or something be following me? First time I can recall anything happening was when I was 4 or so years old. We used to live in Omamo, which is a small town of about 12,000 people, about an hour and a half north of Dundon. Our house was up on the top of a hill and fairly rural. The back of our property backed onto what I can only assume was a paddock of gores, or at least a huge area of it. As far as I'm aware, there were no neighbors living up that way. We also lived next to a sheep paddock that had gaps into the gores as well. Our back door had a ramp that led very close to the gate that led to the backyard, though there was very little separating the backyard from the empty Gores Paddock. When I was little, I'd always get this feeling of utter dread about going anywhere near that back section as soon as it even started getting dark, to the point where, if we were getting home late from anywhere, I would always just climb up the middle of the ramp, instead of going anywhere near the back section. I never knew why it terrified me so much, but it's left me with a lasting fear of what I can't see. When I was 5 or so, I suddenly developed a fear of my closet. It would never close properly. It would just swing open on its own. It wasn't very big, but seemed to connect up to the attic by a manhole, and I never felt comfortable going near it. Didn't ever see anything there though. Not at that house. We moved down to Dundon when I was 8, and for the first couple of years, everything was okay. But when I was 10, I started getting spooked going through the hallway and living room to get through to the bathroom at night. I would always sprint through to the bathroom and then back to my room and wouldn't be able to relax for a good half an hour afterwards. I just felt like I was being watched and followed. The feeling was that if I slowed down at all, I would be attacked by something. I could not sleep in my bedroom at the time unless I was completely covered by my blankets. It was always colder than the rest of the house, and I never felt comfortable in there without a light on or someone else in the room. When I was about 13, I started suffering from depression and still slept in that room. One night, I recall waking up because my leg was freezing. I uncovered myself to discover that it had been pulled out between the slats of the bed. Very awkward to get my foot out of there on its own. Involves a lot of twisting and squeezing by what looked like a hulking 6-foot shadow of something with horns that was sitting on the end of my bed. I covered myself up, pulled my leg back up as fast as I could, and began screaming. My room and my mother's was only separated by about a half an inch of MDF, and yet she didn't wake up at all from me screaming for an hour solid. I eventually fell asleep. In the morning, I had a hand-shaped bruise on my leg where the creature had pulled me out by. I was never comfortable in that room to begin with, and after that point, I had to sleep with the main lights on, not just the bedside light, which had been turned off on that night by something. Closet didn't shut properly in that room either, and I felt like I was being watched from the gap. It had 2 sliding doors that the natural woods pattern had made to look like it was covered in faces of people screaming, and even an evil monk, i.e. the robes, and a malicious looking face. After that, the room was colder, and my bed would shake randomly. Even now, it's still the coldest room in my mother's house, despite getting most of the afternoon sun. While my mother and her husband were renovating the house, they found a hearth, part of a thigh bone, and the top of a porcelain gollywog doll under the lounge floor. The house was built sometime between 1900 and 1908. At the time, we had to run around the outside of the house to get to the bathroom, and so one time, after coming back to the bedroom, my stepsister and I were just entering back into our front door when out of nowhere, a man appeared on the street just outside the gate. Scared us enough that we didn't make that trip again. At the start of the year, I moved into a flat with my fiance, and a few weird things have happened since. Mostly, it's going through the kitchen, which has one entire wall covered in floor-to-ceiling windows that opens up into the backyard, which is accessible from a street above ours, and the street we're on. I can't walk through there at night. I have to run, and always feel like I'm being watched. Unfortunately, the bathroom is through there, and I'm pregnant, so needing to do it is rather often. Coming back though, I've noticed a shadow figure that will bolt through into the hallway, and occasionally little blue balls of light. It makes the hackles in my neck rise, and I don't feel comfortable till I'm back in the bedroom I share with my fiance. Lately, I've been hearing strange noises. It's not unheard of in this house, because we have a possum in our ceiling space. However, the noises I hear have been coming from my room upstairs, which is being used as storage. I keep hearing sounds like being knocked over or rustling. Originally, I just thought my flatmate's kitten had gotten in and was causing a ruckus, but every time I go up to check, there's nothing in there, and nothing has been disturbed. It's happened several times, and my fiance has heard it too. We're not sure what's going on, but he's definitely got a few stories of his own to do with the supernatural. I read the existing story of Area 51 on the site, a creepy haunted place located in Salt Lake City, and would like to clarify a couple of things and add to it. This isn't the Area 51 that's often discussed in Nevada, obviously. Anyway, I was an employee at Area 51 and would clean the entire building on Saturdays. This building is very old. It was first a mink farm. It was also the first building in the state to ever show porn films. It has been various strip and nightclubs until it became Area 51. And the other story, they stated that there was a girl who had died. To clear up the girl's death, it was by an aneurysm, but for some reason, the story keeps told as being cocaine or drug overdose. There was also another death of a male patron on the first main floor by overdose. I've had 2 paranormal experiences while working there. They both happened upstairs. Once, I was cleaning the woman's bathroom where the girl died. The way it is constructed is that there is no entrance door. You get an echo of any movement or people that can travel into the bathroom. While cleaning in there, I heard a bar stool being shuffled and moved around on the wood floor outside the bathroom entrance. I thought it was the maintenance man. I went out there a minute later, and nobody was around. I looked out the windows to see who was parked outside, since there's usually 1 or 2 others in the building as I clean. Nobody was parked out there. I was not aware I'd been alone until that time. Sometimes they leave to get supplies. Another time, I was upstairs cleaning the juice bar area, and I heard my name being called by a man's voice. I looked around, and nobody was there. Also to note, these older buildings around downtown, Salt Lake, are all connected by underground tunnels that are boarded up or barred. Area 51 has access points in the basement. There have been reports of noises, creepy feelings, and of being pushed when someone is in the basement. It's not a pleasant place. A bartender has reported to a local publication that he was stocking shelves alone at night and was standing on a ladder. He looked down to see the apparition of a pair of bare feet walking towards him. I work at Universal Studios currently, and I was sent to your site by my boyfriend. I went through the haunted locations you have for California, and I read the Universal Studios hauntings. I just wanted to add to the Back to the Future, which is now the ride for The Simpsons. I work over at Shrek 4D, which replaced the Rugrats and Nicktoons game show a few years back. The little girl that died at the Back to the Future Simpsons building doesn't just reside there. She takes trips over to Shrek 4D as well. I'm not sure if you know, but Shrek 4D is a motional simulator, but it looks just like a movie theater. We play a 15-minute film between the first and second Shrek in 3D. I've had a personal experience where I was sitting in the theater as one of our shows were going on, and I noticed a shadow of a person moving along the aisle, closest to our first set of automatic doors. It looked like they were walking up the aisle to sit in one of our stationary seats in the back of the theater, so I got enough from my position to check on them, but they disappeared. I thought they probably found another seat just farther back, but when I looked farther ahead at the back aisle, I saw the figure walking across it. I was confused, because I would have seen them round the corner and past the stationary seats. The shadow continued to walk to my aisle, closest to the main exit, and it stopped at the top of my aisle. It was blocking out one of the lights we have for our guests to see when they exit the theater, and it looked at me, and when I stared at it, it looked just like a little girl in a white dress, or a long shirt and pants. I was scared and curious at the same time, and then she just disappeared. I didn't know of any spirits or hauntings or accidents at the theme park before that incident. When I told my other coworkers, they told me of the little girl that died at Back to the Future from an asthma attack. That was the only experience I had with the little girl. Other coworkers, though, have told me what they experienced. They've seen the little hanging around in the theater like walking across the rows, running up and down the aisles. A recent experience was from my friend, that as he was running the show during the same part I had seen her, she was sitting in the front row, watching the movie without the glasses, and she was by herself. He was sitting on the chair nearby, and he smiled at her, wondering where her family was, and she smiled back, and when he looked at the movie and turned back to her, she was gone. He described her the same way, with the long shirt and pants. He was never so scared in his life at Shrek. Others had the same experience I did. They had also told me that she plays behind the curtains of the screen in our backstage area. Lights wouldn't turn on sometimes back there for no reason. Footsteps are heard in the corridor when no one was around while the park was closed, and no music was going on. It would also be heard in the torture chamber in our pre-show room. My other worker had also told me of seeing a male worker that passed away a couple years back, walking across the projector on the aisle in front of it. Other than that, the typical calling of everyone's name inside the auditorium and pre-show room, the footsteps, the feeling of someone following behind you in the shadows, and full apparition of the little girl. Those are the experiences as far as I'm aware of it. I personally will not go behind the stage by myself because of the weird feeling I got. When I was younger, I lived in this house that my family and I rented. I experienced all kinds of paranormal activity. It only happened to my little sisters and I. My parents never experienced anything. My sisters and I would lay in our room at night and talk, and we would see a dark figure walk through her bedroom and just disappear into the closet door. When we would get up and open the door, there would be nothing in sight. We would be home alone and hear talking. I had an attic door in my ceiling above my bed, and I would lay there at night and listen to whispering. Although I couldn't make out what was being said, I could hear voices. My things would get moved. Stuff would fall off my dresser for no reason. Some of my belongings would slide across my dresser. One night, I was lying on my side in my bed, watching a movie, and something came up behind me and tapped my shoulder. I ignored it the first time, so it happened again. I thought it was my sister, so I rolled over to see what she wanted, but to my surprise, I found nobody. So I rolled back over, and it happened again. So I got up and walked around my house to find everyone sound asleep. I got very freaked out and told myself it was just my nerves. Then, a movie fell off my dresser, so I just went to sleep. Doors would always shut and open for no reason. Well, this is my story. It may not be the longest, but it certainly is most terrifying. So this is my friend Sarah's story. In the summer of 2003, she was about 12 years old, living in Modesto, California. She and 3 other friends decided to play with a Ouija board in her back room. One of her friends did a ritual of protection, which her friend thought it was a good idea. After contacting a younger male spirit for a short period of time, and they were able to get his age of about 24 to 26, and had a traumatic death in his previous life. They failed to close the portal in the board and basically walked away from the board and left the way open. Over the next 4 years, she would hear knocking from inside the walls, adjacent to the room the Ouija board was messed with previously. Around the hours of 12 a.m. to 4 a.m., the power in her room would flick on and off. The stereo would turn on, as well as turn off on its own. One night, a friend of hers woke up out of a deep sleep to point out a darkness where the corner of the back room had enveloped the whole ceiling, covering the ceiling fan. They both could not see through the blackness. In 2008, she moved to a different house within 2 weeks of moving in, and she started hearing knocking in her room, TV turning on and off, lights going on and off. Her boyfriend would work the night shift, and she would be home alone and go in the kitchen. Anything left on the counter, such as plates, silverware, spice racks, etc., would shift 4 to 5 inches in random directions. In 2009, she moved back home, where it first began. On the first night of moving back in, while standing in the living room, facing the hallway, she saw a dark shadow figure of a younger male at the beginning of the L-shaped hallway. After taking a second glance, it was gone. As she went to walk down the hallway to go to her room, the end of the hallway accesses the back room. There is a floor-to-ceiling mirror. The door was shut as she was walking. Instead of seeing herself in the mirror as she should have, she saw the same shadow figure 3 feet off the ground. It was as if his knees down were missing. It stayed in that fixed position until she ran in her room and shut the door. Within the next year, knocking continued and actively followed her as she moved 3 times in that year alone. On August 7, 2010, she drove from Modesto, California to Las Vegas, Nevada while taking the I-15 to cross state line. She glanced in her mirror and saw a shadow figure in her back seat. I've been friends with her since April of 2010, and in the process of her moving back with her dad and stepmom, I hung out with her on a daily basis till class started on August 30th, 2010. We have both witnessed drawers open in our absence in our bedroom and bathroom, doors creaking open when no one is home, the sound of glass breaking when nothing has moved or shifted. She's seen a face in our back window one late night, and we were driving on an empty back street one day, and even seeing the shadow figure sitting in her back seat in broad daylight with me, next to her in the car. Her fish tank being moved while she was out for the night or even in the day. Items being moved in a way some intelligence would be necessary, such as her fishnet being moved from the top of her dresser to under her belt and her TV cord. From August 24th to now, it has a presence of attachment with her whenever she goes from the moment wakes to the moment she tries to sleep, and at times, if she's alone, it will keep awake and feels like a heavy pressure lays upon in times when drifting to sleep to her awake. The night of September 4th, 2010, she left to go get changed and get ready around 10:30 at night, while I played laser tag with friends. She was home alone. As she got ready, while showering, she felt the presence in the bathroom with, and in the process of getting dressed and putting on her makeup, she saw a figure walk in her room. Thinking it was her dad, she entered after it. To find her closet door open, her phone flung across the room, the charger unconnected, all her drawers open, approximately 6 drawers. Her fish tank yet again moved, the TV turned on, and the computer turned off, and the bed was unmade. She rearranged everything, closed the drawers, and continued to get ready. As she re-entered her room, again, her phone and her charger were off the connection and tossed about 12 feet across the room, and her closet door closed. She then forgot her charger in her room. She went back upstairs, in which she felt the presence follow her all the way to her car and sit in it with her. she has been with her since it's now 4:28 p.m. on September 10th, 2010. It has been 6 days since that night, and has progressively seemed to get worse, and where she won't or chooses not to speak about it, even to me. This is an incident that happened to me in the Pacific Northwest, Seattle, Washington state area, long ago, in the 1960s. As a young teenager, I was very impressionable. My parents were never active in my life, and I always wanted to feel like I belonged to a group. It didn't matter who gave me the attention, just as long as I got it from somebody. Feeling neglected, I ended up running away from home at the age of 19 so I could join a satanic cult. The cult was pretty serious. We would often meet up at this secluded building in the middle of the woods that was abandoned at night to gather around in circles, drawing pentagrams and praying to evil. We did a lot of drugs and even sacrificed animals as part of our ritual. We would decapitate squirrels and place them inside the pentagram, and other times we would cut ourselves and write our names on the walls with our blood. It was definitely not a good environment for me, to say the least, but at the time, I was thinking of how much of a bond we all had together, the 5 of us. The building itself actually felt very haunted, but because I was so stoned out of my mind, I wasn't sure if it was hallucinations or legitimate spirit haunting this old building. I remember one night, we were injecting each other with needles, and we ended up passing out for a few hours. As I started to regain consciousness, everyone else was completely out, and I swear I saw the presence of an old man in a brown cloak, hood on, and with white eyes that glowed in the darkness of this building. He was there for about 30 seconds, then vanished. He was watching me from the stairs inside the building. We were all in the living room at the time, and there from the living room, you can see the stairs in front of you. The people I was with would sometimes hear voices, evil whispers and laughter so subtle, but quiet enough to hear. I vividly remember another night where we held our bloodied hands together after sacrificing a deer. I could have sworn after 3 minutes of chanting the devil as our leader, we heard the door from the upstairs of the building open and slam twice. We kept going, and I remember one of us blurted out, "If the devil is here, please show yourself." Nothing happened, and we ended up doing drugs again and passed out. The next time, all 4 of us were awakened to one of the cult members convulsing and choking. I was very alarmed by this, panicked, and told the rest of them that we needed help. All of them angrily told me no, leave him be. I yelled at them to help him, that he needed medical help and he would die, and 2 of the cult members proceeded to tackle me and pin me down to the ground to prevent me from doing so. They told me that this is what our Lord wanted to happen, that this was natural, and if he loses his life, the devil will want a new companion. What happened next is something that will always haunt me. I watched this guy die in front of my face, and not one single person gave a crap, except me. They kept trying to tell me that it was natural, that this was supposed to happen. The next thing I knew, the 3 of them were tying me up to keep me from escaping. They told me that I wasn't a worthy member of this cult, and because of my reaction, they couldn't trust me. I told them that I was definitely worthy, that I wouldn't tell a soul, but it was like my words were being ignored. One of the members turns to the other and tells them, "We'll keep him here for the entire night, and figure out what to do with him in the morning." So, they ended up tying me up and leaving me alone for the rest of the night at this old abandoned building that looked like an asylum. They had left for the night. They ended up drugging me and I passed out until I ended up awakening. As I awoke, I was still reeling from the shock of everything that happened. I actually gagged a couple of times. They didn't even move the body. I was tied up in the hallway, and I was forced to look across at the body that was still there. The man's eyes were bulging open, wide, and lifeless. Now here's where the paranormal part kicks in. After a few minutes of being awake, I look across to where the body was, and I could see a group of hooded figures in a circle around the body, cloaked apparitions. I blinked a few times, and they were gone. Was I hallucinating from the drugs? I'm not sure, but it gave me yet another thing to be afraid of. Anyway, not long after that, and I don't even know how this happened, but as I was trying to free myself from the rope that had my hands tied up against the banister of the stairs, I managed to somehow free myself. But that's when I heard voices getting closer to the building. It was the rest of the cult, and they were coming back. At this point, the sun was starting to rise, but it was still dark, so I did my best to flee, and I left out the window in the main room and ended up running through the woods. I just bolted and ran as fast as I could. I'd never ran so fast before in my life. It must have been from the adrenaline. Eventually, I was able to pass through the woods until I ended up on the main road, when I saw an auto dealership. I ran into the dealership, told the workers to call the cops, that I was abducted, and that there was a group of terrible people who let a man die at the abandoned building a few miles into the woods. They called the cops, and they eventually ran out to the building. The body was still there, and the group was arrested. They ended up going to jail for 15 years. The building itself was torn down not too long after, and I've never actually been back to the spot. I don't know why I would anyway. I ended up having PTSD for years after this incident, terrible trust issues, but after years of therapy, I ended up rehabilitating myself. This happened in the 1960s. I guess the reason why I wanted to write this story was to warn you that you should never be desperate enough to join a group of people who do terrible things. Never openly trust people without evidence that they are worth it. And of course, never join a satanic worshipping cult. I made my mistake and almost paid for it with my life. Nowadays, I have 2 kids, and I tell them this story to remind them that there are bad people out there, but also that there are spirits that can be summoned, and they can be very evil. Stay away from all of that. It's not a good lifestyle. What I'm about to tell you happened during the summer of 2015. The incident was at a Mayan Jungle, 2 hours away from Cancun, Mexico. My friend John was moving for work and decided to drive 1,000 miles from his home in Mexico City to Cancun. To an adventurous girl like me, it rang in my ears as a fascinating road trip. I offered to go with him, as he'd be going through some of Mexico's most economic and breathtaking sights. In Cancun, with its beautiful coastline, covered in powdery white sand and deep turquoise blue waters, was not only worth the 1,000-mile drive, but would be the perfect destination to complete my vacation before flying back home to California. Cancun is situated in the Yucatan Peninsula, in Mexico's southeast. The peninsula is a region covered in deep rainforest and jungles, where the Mayans once erected their great empire. The first leg of the trip was as expected. Great sights, great food, great places, great music, great people. However, the rain and terrain soon started changing as we started going deeper into the jungle. Roads were less illuminated, towns and villages scarier. We had enjoyed the road so much. The next leg of the trip was going to be non-stop all the way to Cancun. The night hit us as we drove through one of the deepest parts of the jungle. The road started narrowing until it became a 2-lane road, with the only light coming from the full moon ahead of us, and the dim headlights from the mid-90s hatchback John was driving. He estimated we would be in Cancun in about 2 hours. It was 2 a.m., and the moonlight could let you appreciate the thick vegetation on each side of the road. John was telling me some more folklore about the region and legends about the Mayans that once lived in the region, when suddenly the car started slowing down. John would press on the gas, but the car would struggle to go. Shortly, the oil indicator lit up. Something was wrong, but to our relief, we saw lights up ahead and what seemed to be toll booths. We decided we would park by the booths and call roadside assistance. Our relief was short-lived when we realized the toll booths were under construction and they weren't functioning. There was nobody on duty, so we decided to keep going, but about 25 yards past the booths, the car completely stalled. Luckily, the road was well illuminated from the booth sign, and the car stalled right next to a light pole. John gets out of the car to see what was going on. It was leaking a lot of oil. He calls roadside assistance to no avail due to bad signal. He decides to try to fix the car. He goes to the trunk, gets some tools and a bottle of oil, and gets to work. After many attempts, the car wouldn't start, so John decides to call roadside assistance and finally gets through. Unfortunately, they tell him it would take 3 hours to reach us. I told John we are less than 2 hours from Cancun. Isn't there anything they can do? He put his tools away and gets back in the car and tells me there's nothing we can do but wait, to get some sleep and wait for roadside assistance. He then reclines a seat and goes to sleep. I get out of the car instead and start looking at the road, the vegetation, admire nature. A few minutes went by. Something caught the corner of my eye. I look back at the booths, and I can see the silhouette of a man peeking from one of them. I call John, but he doesn't respond. I look at him, and he is fast asleep. I look back at the booths, and the man leaped from one booth to the other. I yell at John that there is a man at the booths. He wakes up and tells me not to talk nonsense. At this point, the man leaped from the last booth and stood in the middle of the road, dressed in a khaki long-sleeve shirt and khaki pants. Pretty normal, but there was something weird about him. His stance was abnormal, arms wide open, lowered with hands open, and that, when I felt a cold shiver down my spine, when I noticed his arms and fingers were too long for his body. I insist on John, and he decides to get out of the car and sees the man standing back there. He looks at me, then at the man again, and yells at him, "Hey." The man shook his shoulders, put his arms forward like a sleepwalker would, and started walking towards us slowly. John and I looked at each other in disbelief and asked me what's up with this dude. We turned back to the man, and he was now about 10 yards away. I could really see him now. He was of heavy build, about 6 feet tall, short black hair, light brown skin, but I couldn't see his face. It was like an empty space. As he drew closer, we saw in horror that he had no face, just flat plain skin with no nose, no eyes, no forehead, nothing. At about 5 yards, he stopped with his arms still forward like a zombie. He had long arms and bony hands with long fingers. The area was well illuminated that we could see him clearly, that there was no mask, and we were no doubt in front of something paranormal or otherworldly. The Faceless Man tilted his head side to side, and that's when panic set in. I rushed into the car and told John to get in and let's go. He was in shock and took all my screaming to get him back. He rushes close to the hood of the car, and I can see the Faceless Man walking towards us again. John was getting back in the car when I noticed the oil lamp on the car's hood and yelled at him to put it on. He pops the hood of the car and puts it on. The Faceless Man had taken 2 long steps and was now 5 feet from when John was rushing back in the car. He turned the engine to no avail. I could see the torso of the Faceless Man through the driver's side rear window. I was totally panicking. Then the car finally started, and we took off as fast as the car could. We look ahead at the road, and we hear what sounded like a hit on the rear bumper. I screamed at John that he is probably hanging off the bumper. John, short of breath, tells me he doesn't think so, as he would feel the weight in the car, and that I might have to get back to the back seat to check. I was about to, when I looked back and see the Faceless Man standing back there in the middle of the road, fading with the distance as we speed away. In a couple very long hours of shock and silence, we reached Cancun's city limits. We stopped at the gas station to collect ourselves. He had no face. John would repeat this over and over for a while. When we were calm and rested enough to keep going, John turns the car engine and the car does not turn on. We look at each other with horror, but then remembered we were safe away from the scene, and we smiled, slightly in relief. I want to express that we did not see Slender Man. That's an internet creepypasta. The body of the man was like a normal heavy-built guy, just long arms with bony hands. He even had hair. This experience changed my view about risks and scary parts of being an adventurer, but I will continue to have adventures in the deserts, forests, and jungles of the world. I just hope I don't ever run into the Faceless Man again.
I was reading through several stories today on your website, and one in particular sparked a memory of an experience I had when I was 8 months pregnant with my daughter. I may not have shared this story with you once before, but I don't remember. I remember that night just like it was yesterday. An evening in early 1994, my husband and I were watching TV on the couch when I decided to go to bed. I blew out a candle I had burning on the kitchen table and then headed to the bedroom. It wasn't too long after I crawled into bed that I was abruptly taken over by this unseen force sitting on my belly. My daughter began to move very violently and I felt like I couldn't breathe. I looked out my bedroom door and could see this flickering light coming from the living room. I figured my husband fell asleep on the couch and forgot to turn off the halogen floor lamp we had sitting behind it. I began to scream as loud as I could for him, but nothing came out of my mouth. The harder I tried to scream for help, the harder the unseen force seemed to push down on me. I began to pray. I prayed like crazy, asking Jesus to protect me and my unborn child. I kept looking out the bedroom door, seeing that flickering light, and hoping to see my husband come running in, but he never came. The whole incident lasted for what seemed like forever. But when it was over, just like that. There was no more pain. I could breathe, and my daughter was at peace. That's not the end of the story, though. I got up from the bed and headed to the living room to tell my husband what had happened. No sooner than I left the bedroom, of course, I found him sleeping soundly on the couch. But the halogen light behind it wasn't on. The flickering light I kept seeing throughout the ordeal was the candle on the kitchen table. As I explained in the beginning, I blew this candle out before I went to bed. And I know I did, because I have always been very cautious about burning candles. The candle had somehow rekindled itself and burned all the way down to the wick. Apparently, the glass votive had gotten so hot that it broke and sent flames from the wick onto the table and placemats. The entire top of the table was on fire, placemats and all. I started screaming at my husband to wake up. He jumped off the couch to find me trying to smother the flames out with a kitchen towel. The apartment started to quickly fill up with black smoke. He grabbed the fire extinguisher and put the fire out. After it was all said and done, we talked about what had just happened, trying to make some sense of it all. I was certain the unseen force was trying to kill me and my baby. I thought it was holding me down so that when the fire spread through the apartment, I would die from smoke inhalation, or worse, burn to death. My husband thought that whatever it was trying to warn me, that it was trying to wake me up so that I would discover the fire. But I swear I was not asleep. At some point, I thought maybe it was all just a bad dream. But then it dawned on me. If it was just a dream, how was I able to see the flickering lights coming from the living room, which turned to be flames? What I do know is, had I not gotten up when I did, it wouldn't have been long before the whole apartment would have been filled with smoke and fire, and we all would have perished. Guardian angel or evil spirit? I guess I will never know. These particular experiences occurred when I was around 8 or 9 years old, and it happened to be my first encounter with the paranormal. I grew up in a very religious household, and my parents were strict disciplinarians. Unfortunately, I was subjected to a lot of physical abuse at the hand of my stepmother. My biological mother died when I was only 3 months old, and my father remarried a little while after. She was an absolute witch to me, and to this day, I don't know why my dad even found her to be remotely compatible. She would call me a filthy animal because I wasn't praying enough at times. The first experience I had with the paranormal was also toward the end of my dad's relationship with this woman. I can remember a moment I was crying because my dad had been working construction all night and didn't come home until late night. I'll never forget how she spat in my face, told me that real ladies don't cry about daddy working late nights. I told her specifically that I really wanted daddy, and she told me if I didn't calm down, she was going to throw me into the pantry closet and lock the door, which was this huge empty space that could fit 2 adult-sized humans in. Naturally, as an 8-year-old kid, I revolted. She kept her word and threw me in there for an hour. This is where something creepily paranormal happened. After about 20 minutes in, I could hear a faint whispering of a female lady in my ear. I couldn't make it out, but I'll never forget what it sounded like. It was very soothing, and I felt very comforted. I then felt a breath on the back of my neck, and 2 cold hands touched my shoulder. The pantry closet got a lot cooler all of a sudden, and in my mind, all I was thinking about was the sound I heard from this voice. I ended up curling up on the floor of the pantry and started drifting off to sleep. As my eyes began to feel heavy, I squinted with limited visibility. I turned my head to the opposite side of the dark pantry when I saw a pair of glowing green eyes in the mouth of someone. The crazy thing was, whatever this thing was, it had razor-sharp teeth, as if they were fangs. I could only see their eyes, and it almost looked like it was slowly opening its mouth, as if it were going to devour me whole. I closed my eyes completely for a few seconds, opened them up again, and it was gone. I'm not sure what the second presence was, but it didn't seem very friendly at all. As for the female voice and the touching, I truly believe that it was my biological mother comforting me through tough times. Well, anyway, I remember I ended up staying in the closet for longer than I was supposed to, and when my dad came home, he had a talk with my stepmother. Thankfully, my dad saw through her lies, and he broke up with her not too long after this incident happened. From that day on, the pantry closet had a reputation for creepy, ghostly activity. The door would randomly open slowly and shut at times. If there were items on the shelves, such as cans, they would sometimes fall on the ground. My dad told me one of the scariest things happened to him after he got home from work. It was another late night working. My sister, my brother, and my grandmother were all asleep at the time. My grandma had moved in shortly after my dad broke up with my stepmother to help take care of us. Right across from the pantry closet was the kitchen. My dad comes home and he ends up going into the kitchen to decompress for a moment after a hard day's work. Right then, the pantry closet opened slowly. And that's when he saw something. He swears to this day that thing he saw looked 100% real, and he was not hallucinating. Standing in the pantry was a faceless man in a red tuxedo with horns on his head. My dad froze with fear, blinked his eyes twice, and the figure was gone. Later that night, he actually fell asleep and had a dream that he went to hell and saw his ex, former stepmother. The creepy thing is, the faceless man that he saw in the pantry was holding hands with my stepmom. My stepmom had cuts all over her face. I remember he woke up screaming and never saw the figure ever again in the pantry, or had a dream about my stepmother either. Another experience. My stepmother, sister, brother, grandma, and I all slept in one room, different beds of course. It was a normal night, and I just fell asleep as usual, hours later. I woke up for no reason and saw a person sitting in my grandmother's bed. I thought it was just my grandma praying, since she would always pray, but then I started to realize that my grandma was sleeping, and this person looked a bit younger. I just stared at whatever that thing was and noticed it was looking right back at me. This wasn't my mom because it looked like an entirely different woman. I've seen pictures of my mom, and she was a ginger and had beautiful thick long hair. This figure I saw was bald-headed and looked very distraught. After she looked at me, she looked back at her hands and covered them with her face. I know for a fact that it was a woman because she had feminine features in her face. You could see it clearly in the body of a woman. Not only was she bald-headed, but her face was burned and disfigured. All I did was stare at her. Then, after all that, she suddenly got up, turned away from me, and disappeared. Eventually, I fell asleep again. I woke up the next morning and asked everybody if they were in the room last night. Then I asked my grandma if she had been praying that night. Everybody, including my grandma, said no. That was the first time I ever saw that lady, but from that day on, almost all my relatives that lived in that house have seen the very same woman I have. Only difference, they have been scared. Me, on the other hand, though I was slightly afraid, I had a curiosity about this whole experience.
I attended Harding University in Searcy, Arkansas not too long ago. During my senior year, I stayed a few months in a private dorm in the Patty Cobb Girl dormitories. Many people say that various parts of Harding campus are haunted by the ghost of Gertie, a girl who died by falling from a bell tower on campus back in the early 1900s. She has been known to haunt the old music building, the brick pathway, that cuts across campus, and the bell tower, which has since been detached and placed on campus as a landmark. One other thing she is said to haunt happens to be the Patty Cobb dormitories. There is debate as to whether or not it's Gertie or a different ghost entirely, but either way, one thing is for certain. Patty Cobb is haunted. I'd heard about this prior to moving into the Patty Cobb dorms, but I was told a different story about how she only haunted the first floor dorms. I was given a dorm on the 3rd floor. It was a private dorm that had no connecting suites to it. I had my own private bathroom, and the room was not shared with a roommate. At first I was thrilled with not having to share a bathroom with anyone. Then I started having strange feelings at night. I would find that I would hear noises in the hallway at times. Of course, being at dorm, I passed it off as silly girls wandering the hallways at night. No biggie. But then I started having strange feelings in my room. There were times I would feel as though someone was sitting at the edge of my bed. Sometimes I felt as though someone was standing there staring at me. The doorknob would also jiggle at various points during the night. I normally tried to ignore it, thinking maybe it was an RA doing nightly dorm checks. The university has a strict curfew. But there would be times that it would happen at 3 in the morning, when any sane person would already be out of the hallways and in bed. The few times I opened the door upon hearing it jiggling, there would be nobody in the hallway. The most memorable experience I've ever had was in the middle of the night. I was soundly sleeping when all of a sudden I was awoken by a knock on my door. It scared me so much because it was a very authoritative and loud knock, as if someone was trying to break into my room. I looked inside the keyhole, and I see this old man standing in a security outfit outside of the door. The man looked oddly out of place. The outfit looked Victorian. I wasn't dressed, so I told him just a minute. After about 3 minutes, I opened the door, and the security person was gone. I looked down the hallway at the other end and see a dark shadow floating down the hallway. I never saw that man again. Eventually, I moved out of that room and moved in with a girl a few doors down. While I still could hear the occasional freaky noises in the hallway at morning hours, the feeling of something being in the room and the doorknob jiggling seized in my new room. I found out later from an older friend of mine, however, that she had lived in the exact same dorm room that I had scary issues in. A few years earlier, she and a friend of hers were sitting around talking. She was sitting at her front desk and felt someone strangle her. She felt a pressure on her neck and even started choking. She turned around to see her friend staring at her with wide eyes. "What happened?" she asked. "I just saw a pair of see-through hands behind you," her friend replied. To this day, she swears up and down that Gertie choked her in her dorm room, the exact dorm room that I had so many freaky encounters in. And people wonder why I get so paranoid being alone in the house at night. Earlier this night, I was rehashing past visits to a cemetery in my hometown in Naugatuck, Connecticut, called Guntown, when I remembered a visit to Iowa when I was 17. So, back in 2000, I went to visit a friend and spent only a few days there. My friend, having been to 13 Stairs, I just recently found out its real name, Pleasant Ridge, many times told me about it, and we decided to make a trip of it. There were 4 of us in total, 3 teens and an adult. My friend told me the stories about bodies being buried in the steps, about the graves being mostly young children, about possible Satanist activities, and the like, before we arrived, so I was prepared. We left a little after 11:30 p.m., Arrived there shortly after midnight without any problems finding it. I think there was a gate, but it was open. We parked a few feet from the steps with the car facing them. The moon was out, but it was still fairly dark, so we brought flashlights. We went to check it out only to look around some and take some photographs. It was around winter, so it was cold and windy. We were the only ones there. No other cars in sight, at least. We made our way up the stairs and into the cemetery. It was eerie. I kept getting those deep chills up and down my spine that kind of make your body jerk, and a definite feeling of being watched. I know my friends complained of the same and wanted to leave minutes after arriving. One claimed to have heard their name being called and being touched, like someone was tugging on their clothing, and seeing shadows move around the tombstones. I didn't experience any of that myself, but I was weirded out all the same. We walked around a bit, not too far from the stairs themselves, and took some photos of the graves. After about 30 minutes, and it being well after midnight, the others were ready to leave. This is where the freaky thing happened. To our knowledge, we were the only ones there. There weren't any other cars visible, nor people. After having a somewhat disappointing time, in my opinion, we made our way down the steps and towards the car. We had the flashlight on by then and lighting our way, when my friend saw something black on the ground. He rushed back to the car and turned the headlights on, and right at the bottom of the steps in the parking lot was a huge pentacle traced out in what looked like black paint. Look, I'm not crazy, and I know it wasn't there before we climbed the steps. The car was parked so the headlights would light up the bottom of the steps so we could see them. There was nothing on the ground beforehand. By then, my friends were screaming and crying and pulling me into the car. I snapped a photo or two, and then we sped off. I do recall the car stalling once before we left. I waited until I got back home to develop the film, only to find that there was nothing at all on the roll. It was a roll of 24, all of which were of the cemetery, and the roll was completely blank. That irked me. The pinnacle thing was crazy. We weren't drunk or high or anything stupid like that, and I know the four of us couldn't have imagined it, and it definitely was not there when we first arrived. I'm not saying ghosts did it either. For all I know, there could have been some kids there already and decided to mess with us. I heard it gets vandalized a lot. It's just what we experienced that night, and my friends who are from that area were horrified for a few days about what happened and mentioned some rubbish about going to hell. It's a little hard to believe, and I wouldn't have either if I wasn't there, but I thought it was interesting and felt like sharing. I'd love to go back one day. I'm not sure if this is a haunting or anything. More of a strange happening at a haunted place. Anyway, thanks for listening. I wonder if anyone else ever experienced that. I thought it was strange. I have a sister Janet who's dealt with paranormal experiences over her life. She sent this site to me via email. I in return thought that I would share my feelings and some of my encounters with you. Some of the stories I read from your site were very convincing, while others sounded a bit like a hoax. Although my experiences would sound like the latter to many people, I swear that I believe that all I've seen to be true, although inexplainable. As many of your stories, my experiences also started in childhood. Mine, I believe, may be a result of troubled years, reflecting child abuse and fears of daily trials. Perhaps my apparitions were given a portal because of the fears. I remember as far back as my early adolescence, living in a house that sent a chill in me, and fear to go to the upstairs alone. Now, My very human predator used to always stalk me in the long narrow hallway around the wall from a stairway, which accounts for some of the fear. However, this person was not always present in my home. The feeling was always there. I remember at night I slept in an antique frame bed handed down through the family. I would lay very still, and that bed would shake like it had a vibrator attached. I heard sounds and footsteps. Once when I was a teenager, I was alone in the house. I wanted to wear a jacket that was stored in the third floor attic closet. I went up to the enclosed stairway to the top, thinking of nothing but retrieving my jacket. When I stepped onto the floor, an old wind-up antique Victoria record player started playing a very creepy song called Fernando's Hideaway. I've hated that song since I was a baby, and my brothers would play it to frighten me and make me cry. I ran out of my house frightened by the song and about 10 blocks to my best friend's house. When I got there, her mother, known as the Gypsy Lady, was having a seance in her kitchen. The table these people were standing around rose off the floor just about an inch. I bolted from there too. To this point, most of my experiences were sound and physical experiences. I had not seen any apparitions. During my second marriage in my late 20s, my husband and I bought an old log cabin, which was hand-built with logs and stone from land it stood on many years earlier. It was beside the Chillicothe Creek on old Indian grounds. This is where I began to see apparitions, both frightening experiences and enlightening experiences. Many things occurred. An unseen force put a large dent in a metal cabinet in the laundry room right before my eyes. My little 3-year-old stepdaughter would not stay in her bed. She would crawl under the bed to sleep or hide in a closet. One night, I found her under clothes in a laundry basket in the laundry, just outside of her bedroom. The area of the house seemed to be the most affected. It was here that one afternoon while putting clothes into her washer that I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I was alone in the house at the time. When I looked behind me, I saw a black hooded robed figure. I do not remember a face, nor do I remember this figure being much taller than me, at 5'4" height. I do remember getting very scared. I looked away, and then it was gone. A small bathroom was also off this room. I recall once while taking a morning shower, hearing animal growling and scratching at the bathroom door. These sounds disappeared when I began reciting the 23rd Psalm. One night while I was sick with the flu and spending the night on the sofa, I remember awakening to an apparition copycat that looked exactly like my husband in his pajamas in the bedroom doorway, but he was transparent. This also disappeared after a brief encounter. Our life together in this house was rocky, and I thought perhaps I was losing my mind. I didn't do drugs, and only drank socially. Everything that was happening was very real. One final memory I believe I have, which was as a result of my depression which I was falling into. I'd come to a point that I did not want to leave the house. I also knew in my heart that my husband was having an affair. One night after contemplating ending my life, I sought God through deep prayer and called the 700 Club to ask for the prayer line to pray for me. The same night while I lay in bed alone in my dark room, a light started to shine in the corner across from my bed. It grew brighter, and it was in the form of a bright light ball that floated across the room and hovered at my bedside. I was not frightened and reached up to investigate. I felt a hand from out of the light take my hand, and I heard a mental message saying that everything would be okay. The light then just went away. I was left feeling cleansed, happy, and pure, as if touched by God himself. I wanted to tell the world that life goes on. I couldn't utter swear words and put down my cigarettes. The cleansing phenomenon unfortunately was temporary, and I slid back into my old ways after a few weeks. The divorce occurred, we moved out of the house, and my life went on. The okay part came a few years later, when I became a mother of my own child for the first time. I went to school and became a registered nurse. I fell in love with the man that I am now married to. That was the last apparition I've seen, until my nursing career took me into some old nursing homes. I tend to always work the night shift. It fits into my lifestyle. One night, while working in a home in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, I saw a strange occurrence. A helium birthday balloon floated out of the resident's room, traveled down the center of a long corridor as if being held in the hand of a child. It bounced along, hitting the ceiling at times and floating down, but in a straight line. It moved down that hallway. The balloon took a turn at another resident's room and went inside. This resident started screaming to get that out of her room. By the way, it was her birthday. The same nursing home was the place of violence, murder, and unfortunate dread. I have other stories, but this is enough for now. The Willard P. Hall Mansion on Hall Street in St. Joseph, Missouri, is haunted. Willard P. Hall was the lieutenant governor of Missouri during the last part of the Civil War. When the governor died, Willard assumed the office of governor. With the Civil War raging, he moved the state house from Jefferson City to St. Joseph. I don't know why he did that, because St. Joseph was pretty well known to favor the South. After the mansion was used as a residence, it became a rectory for priests who served the St. Peter's and Paul Catholic Church parish next door. As parishes were closed in the Diocese of Kansas City, St. Joseph, one priest took over the St. Peter and Paul Church and the Immaculate Conception Church, a church immediately west, about 3/4 mile away. The pastor leased out the first floor of the house, at that time, to United Cerebral Palsy and allowed me to live upstairs to oversee the property so it would not be vandalized. Most of the walls throughout the house were solid brick and stone construction, yet sounds of large rats could be heard scrambling within those walls. The light switches in the old servants' quarters upstairs, where I lived, were not up and down switches, but to be rotated in a circular manner. Those switches were observed rotating, on their own, turning the lights on and off. Dark shadows frequently covered doorways, eliminating all light outside those particular rooms. Once, when that happened, a loud scream, like that of a wild cat, lion, or tiger, could be heard, and it was ear-shattering. The room on the southwest corner upstairs that was my bedroom became so cold that ice actually formed thick in the corners of the room, and the walls were frosty. Sounds of music, like a very soft harp, was heard on occasion by a number of people. One parish council meeting stopped suddenly when one of the councilwomen, who was wearing a shoulderless summer dress, felt an icy hand placed upon her shoulder, and no one was behind her. And finally, many times, when it was very late at night or very early morning, one could hear footsteps throughout the house, followed by a conversation that always turned into an argument, and then was followed by the soft crying of a woman. The basement of the mansion appears to have been used by either slaves or prisoners, and there's a rumor that there's a cave entrance hidden somewhere in the basement that leads down to the Missouri River, a distance of about 1.5 miles. I never found it. When I called the pastor once in the middle of the night and asked him to come over and experienced some of the things going on. The icy room, a darkened doorway, and the sound of a screaming large cat. He told me no way. Do you think I'm nuts? I'll come over first thing in the morning. He never showed up, and I moved. The place is still standing, but I haven't been back. Hello, I live in Newton, North Carolina, and I'm addicted to this site. My story happened about 5 years ago. Me and my sister Melissa lived next door to one another at the time. The house that she lived in had been vacant for about 16 years. The previous owner was, according to the neighbors, a very mean old lady who had been sent to live in a nursing home and refused to allow her home to be sold. It stayed that way until her death. As soon as she died, her children put the house up for sale, and my sister bought it. At first, it was just little things that happened. Melissa and my nephew, he was 3 at the time, were sitting in the living room with no TV on, and he asked her who was there because he heard people talking on the stairs. They were alone in the house at the time. The stairs were a hot spot in the house. When she was pregnant with my niece, she fell or was pushed down 3 times. Her family had went on vacation for the week, so I was left to take care of the animals. Well, 3 days into their vacation, I went over to feed and water, and I heard a horrible commotion upstairs. It sounded like the house was falling apart, so I freaked out and left and didn't return. When they got home from vacation, I told them what happened, and my brother-in-law went to check, and in their bedroom, which was once the previous owner's, and my sister's entire closet, was dumped out in the middle of the bedroom floor. Everything. My sister even remembers a very vivid encounter she once had when she was all alone. She walked upstairs and then walked back downstairs. There was an old rocking chair that she previously purchased and put into the living room after it was discovered that it was an antique. For whatever reason, she couldn't take her eyes off of it, ended up buying it, and it's a really old rocking chair. As she made her way towards the living room, from the distance, she could see a figure that was sitting in the rocking chair. The rocking chair was slowly moving back and forth, continuously without stop. The outline was light enough to make out, and it looked like a shadow, a gray mist, but it was definitely a figure that she could spot. She turned on the light, and it was like it was gone in an instant. Her eyes were not playing tricks on her. She literally saw something, and the rocking chair was still slowly moving back and forth. It eventually stopped, and that's when she heard a loud crash coming from upstairs. It completely startled her. She begrudgingly went upstairs to investigate, and as she went into the bathroom, she noticed that the mirror completely broke by itself. No logical explanation, just the mirror broken. Even though she was terrified, she ended up going to sleep anyway after she cleaned up the mess in the bathroom. But she couldn't even get to sleep. Mainly because her cat Smokey kept staring at the bathroom in the dark. Nothing but moans and groans. It was something completely uncharacteristic for him to do, as he never actually acted out in any way, shape, or form. But this night was particularly creepy for her, and the cat as well. Once, my sister was sleeping in one of the bedrooms, and woke up to an old woman walking across her bedroom floor to the window. She described her, and my mother went to the library to pull old obituaries, and showed the picture to my sister. She immediately broke down in tears because she was looking at the woman she had seen in her room. She immediately started packing and sold the home. The new owners now have similar things going on. Their daughter was pushed down the stairs, and their son has seen a man in one of the bedrooms on numerous occasions. And then he came home one day to find their cat dead at the foot of the stairs. My mom had about 3 years of on and off visitations. She would wake up around 11 at night with a start to see different shapes of grayish white fog, which every time she would think it was smoke and her house was on fire. Sometimes the fog was in a blue arc by her dresser. Sometimes the whole room was filled up with this misty fog. Other times it was 3 big ovals by her TV. And even sometimes she had a big oval on all 3 sides of her bed. The one that really scared her was when she woke up to see the fog by the foot of her bed. Then it flew over her with such a force and went through a wall above her headboard. Mom even walked through the misty fog one night because, again, she thought her house was on fire and she jumped up to get her robe. I asked her if it was cold when she went through it, and she said that it wasn't, and it didn't smell either. She did see one apparition of a boy of about 18 years old. He was standing next to her bed with his head down. Mom said he was grayish looking, and she did not talk to him, but she felt an awful sadness emanating from him. Shortly after that, we had somebody come and clear the house. The woman who cleared the house said that since Mom volunteered at a hospital, she was bringing all sorts of spirits and ghosts back home with her. They sort of attached themselves to her. After that, Mom said the house felt very empty. It's been 2 years since her house has been cleared, and so far, so good. I think we also brought stuff in, because when we were kids, we used to play with the Ouija board in the 1960s. Now I know just how dangerous it is to use one of them, unless you really know what you're doing. But in the 1960s, you really didn't hear anything about the dangers of Ouija boards. It was just plain fun. When the person who cleared Mom's home found a ghost of a man under the stairs in the workroom, it kinda explained why my dad and my sister always felt like they were being poked in their backs by an unseen finger. And us kids always had to go into the laundry room to get pop out of a fridge for supper. We would get the pop and run upstairs as fast as we could. All 3 of us kids did the same thing. We couldn't wait to get out of that room. I really think that spirit hung around since we dug him up in the 60s with the Ouija board. He's gone now though, and hopefully at peace. A few years back, I was in a car outside Worcestershire State Hospital in Worcestershire, Massachusetts. The building was all boarded up, and I had a vision. This was the first time this happened to me, and it scared the wits out of me. In reading your website terminology, I think it was a residual haunting. I heard blood-curdling screams and saw a man in a striped nightshirt, like the nightgown type shirts worn in the 1800s, and wearing a derby hat. He had dark hair and a mustache. He was levitating near the ceiling of a hallway. It seemed to happen quickly, but the screaming was heart-wrenching. After we left, I was quite shaken. Sometime after, I discovered a website called opacity.us. A photographer posts photos of haunted abandoned mental health hospitals and other old abandoned buildings. He has pictures of Worcestershire State Hospital, including the boarded up building. I came across a picture of the hallway that I saw in my vision. What do you make of this? Was it a residual haunting? I've always experienced spirits or ghost type experiences, usually a friendly or mischievous spirit. I've also felt or connected with loved ones. Another odd experience involved myself and my 3 children. I woke up to one of my children screaming. I got up to check on him, and it appeared he had screamed in his sleep. I went back to bed, and when I did, I saw this creature that looked like one of the gremlins from the movie of the same name. It ran through the living room where my bed was and through the front door. A few years later, I mentioned this to a friend. My children said that they remember that night and also experienced this. While we talked about the experience, my younger son drew a picture of the exact same thing we all saw. I was floored, as I had no idea that they had all seen this. I originally chalked it up to being half asleep, and perhaps I had imagined it. I just wanted to share this with you. In 1957, my family moved to an old farmhouse in Mount Laurel, New Jersey. I was 7 years old at the time, and as I went upstairs to my new bedroom with an armload of things, a terrible wave of fear swept over me when I reached the top of the stairs. From then on, I disliked that small area at the top of the stairs where it met the hallway. Unhappily, there was no way to avoid it. I had to walk through it to get into my bedroom. Other than that, nothing else happened that I know of until 1966. From my bed, I could see it out into the hallway to that small area on top of the stairs that had always frightened me. One night, towards the end of August, I woke up very, very slowly, only to realize that there was a terrible stench in the bedroom. It was like a mix of rotten garlic, human waste, and rotting flesh. Then I noticed the room was icy cold. Remember, it was August, usually the hottest time of the year in New Jersey. I was lying on my side, facing the doorway, and when I opened my eyes, I saw that the bedroom door was wide open, and a figure stood in the doorway, very close to the spot that had always spooked me. Since no lights were on, all I could make out was the silhouette of a tall, dark figure that seemed to be wearing some kind of long robe with a hood. What truly petrified me was seeing this creature's eyes. They glowed red and stared straight at me. But before I could scream, somehow the knowledge came to me from somewhere, my guardian angel, that if I acknowledged this creature's existence, I would be haunted for the rest of my life. So I pretended to be asleep, which was not easy. And after a while, I felt the cold room become warm again, the dreadful smell disappear, and the figure fade away. We moved out in 1967, and the house was torn down in 1972. I, for one, was not the least bit sorry to see it go. As a child living in our old cotton mill house, raised by my grandmother, great aunt, and her daughter, my cousin, I had many frightening paranormal experiences. I will elaborate on some of them as time goes on, but this story is a recap of many of the things I've experienced living in that house as a young child. I heard the classic footsteps, sounds of papers being crumbled, sounds of books falling when nothing was out of place. Everybody in the family, including myself, heard our names called. Once, I woke up and heard a soft, echoey female voice say deep magic. By way of explanation, deep magic was a facial moisturizer. I once woke up to see a tiny pinpoint of light in my room, which expanded until the entire room was bright as day, and then faded quickly back to darkness. Once I crawled under my grandmother's bed while everybody was outside, something I was not allowed to do, and heard a gruff voice beside my ear say one word, gray. I had then, and still have no idea what that could have meant, but I got the heck out of there from under that bed, and never went back under there again. I had an encounter, a long conversation in the house with a strange unknown elderly woman who called herself Granny Grunt. I saw a little black imp, the shadow of a skeleton, and a handless arm which came up from between the bars of my iron bedspread and saw blood drip from the ceiling. When I was about 4, I saw a shadowy figure that at the time I thought was the Easter Bunny walk through the living room and disappear into the wall. I now suspect there might have been some sort of gateway in my cousin's room, because much of the activity seems to come from or disappear in that direction. One night, I'd gone to bed early and had a dream that a being, who looked what UFOologists nowadays call an alien gray, was trying to force a full-sized apple down my throat. I awoke, gasping for breath, crying and choking, with that feeling still lingering in my throat of something big being forced down it. My grandmother had an old rocking chair with a woven cane bottom, which creaked loudly whenever you would sit down in it or get up. When my great aunt broke her hip and later died of cancer, for 2 nights in a row, I heard something sit down in that chair, squirm around a little bit, and then get up. I once heard the sound of the chair rocking in the night. Additionally, while my great aunt was in the hospital dying of cancer, I was awakened 3 nights in a row by something banging on the front door. Of course, nobody was there, but my great aunt died 3 days later. Later on, when I was in my 20s, still living in that house, I awoke to see a short woman with her hair in a bun and a white apron over an old-fashioned dress standing by my bed, who quickly vanished. I had many experiences of being in that half-awake and unable to move state, while hearing voices talking and people moving around in the house. Once, while I was in that state, I felt and heard something leap quickly into the bed beside me and lie there, growling menacingly. It vanished, of course, when I was able to fully wake up. I finally got married when I was 28 and moved away. After my cousin passed away, I inherited the house and my husband and I moved back into it. Strangely enough, I never heard or saw anything in those days we lived there together. The house was totally quiet and peaceful. My wife and I lived in Ringgold, Georgia, and have lived there for 25 years in the log home that we built ourselves, with a lot of help from friends and family. This was about 1983. About 3 or 4 years after we moved into our log home, some strange things began to happen. We would be watching TV when all of a sudden the TV would go off, and when we found the problem, it was unplugged from the back of the TV. You have to turn the plug on the power cord to unplug the TV, and it was lying on the floor behind the TV. After this happened, we started to hear Indian music and some very low volume chanting in the bedroom when my wife and I would be sleeping. I would see the outline of a body on the wall, like a shadow moving, and it looked as if it was a stereotypical Native American. There was a moment where I went into the bathroom. In the mirror, I saw the presence of some dark face behind me. At times it would get very chilly in the house, even when it was warm outside, but only in one bedroom. We have a big wall clock hanging on the great room wall, and has 3 chimes hanging down from it for the doorbells. When you push the doorbell button, the chime plays a short tune. At times, for no reason at all, the chimes would start to move and ring like someone had pushed the doorbell button, but there would be no one there. Our commodes would flush, and there would not be anyone out there to flush them. We have found human bones in Indian pottery, arrowheads, and lead bullets. We do know that a Civil War battle was fought on our land, and we checked with a university in Alabama. They told us that this was an area that had a Cherokee Indian village back in the 1700s to 1800s. We reburied the bones in the pottery shards, and the strange happenings have not been as frequent as they were. We still live here and intend to stay, and the strange happenings have not been a threat or harmed anyone in any way. This is an account of events experienced by a close friend of mine. I've changed the names to protect the identities of the people involved. These events took place in Manchester, England. I met Charlotte some 2.5 years ago when we both signed up for a course of ice skating lessons. We got on well from the start and stayed in touch afterwards. Charlotte's father had started to suffer from dementia, and her mother was taking care of him at home. Unfortunately, her mother suffered a stroke in November 2008 and was unable to return home. Therefore, it fell on Charlotte to look after her father. Sadly, Charlotte's father died in his sleep in February 2010. This was a big shock as, although 89 years of age, he was very sprightly and in good health. As you can imagine, Charlotte was devastated. One of Charlotte's sisters came up from down south to stay with her in the days afterwards, and while they were arranging the funeral, they both slept in their father's bed. A couple of days after he died, Charlotte had a very vivid dream. In it, she saw her father as a young man in rolled up shirt sleeves and a tank top. He was running down a hill, and hot on his heels was a dog, like they were having a race. She said her father looked very happy and full of life. She has never experienced anything like this before and felt it was her father's way of showing her where he was now. I asked her if she recognized the dog. She said her father used to talk about a dog he had when he was young, but she had never seen a picture of it. It was obviously a very profound experience because it eased her grief, in that she'd felt he had gone to a better place. It is now March 2010. I saw Charlotte over the weekend, and she told me what else had been happening. Charlotte, her sister, and her brother-in-law had been in their father's house clearing it out and decorating. Charlotte was in one of the bedrooms and came across an organ her father bought her when she was 16. She plays the piano. Anyway, she sat down and started playing it. The moment she did this, the phone started ringing. Bear in mind, the phone was disconnected some weeks ago. Her sister answered it, but there was no one there. While the three of them were upstairs in separate areas, Charlotte's brother-in-law asked who was making a drink. Her sister replied that they were all busy and that he should make his own drink. Her brother-in-law said that was not what he meant and asked who was boiling the kettle. When Charlotte's sister went downstairs, the kettle had just boiled and switched itself off. No one had put it onto a boil. A day or so later, Charlotte began playing the organ, and once again, as soon as she did, the phone rang, just like before, still disconnected, of course. Charlotte said that one night they were sat around talking about their father, and the lights in the room started flickering. This has never happened before. As soon as they stopped talking, the flickering stopped. I told Charlotte that experiences like this are fairly common, and it's her father letting her know that he is still around. The last time I saw her, she was in pieces. After these experiences, although still very upset, she seems very much calmer and accepting. It is wonderful when things like this happen. If only it could be that way for everyone. Hello. I wrote to you a while ago about the house I grew up in, but I had something happen to me back in 2005 that I could never explain. My husband and I were going through the immigration process back in 2005, and while our case was being reviewed by the INS, my husband had to stay in Mexico. This was a very stressful time, and we were facing a lot of uncertainties. So we packed up and moved to his family's house down in Samoa, Mississauga. At the time, my oldest son was only 2 years old, and my mom had driven down with us to help with the INS appointments and to help us get settled into our new home. Well, so when we finally arrived to my husband's family home, we got unpacked and settled in to await our verdict. We would hear from the INS 6 months later. The house is basically 2 homes together. The building is L-shaped. It has the original house, and then you have to go outside into the courtyard to access the second house. This area had a bathroom and a store, and a supply room for the store, and above this was our apartment. This area had not anyone stay in it for maybe 10 years. This area was like a duplex attached by a door through the living rooms, so we took the left side and closed up the right side. Now, the side we took had an unusual feature. It had a huge bedroom that was divided by a wall and had an open doorway, so it was 2 bedrooms in one. We slept in one bedroom, and my mom slept on the other side. Now, this is a huge home, especially by Mexico standards, but we only shared it with 2 other people, my brother and sister-in-law, because the other family members moved about 10 years before. Nothing about this home seemed scary or creepy, but I did learn that between the 2 houses, 2 of my husband's toddler sisters were buried. I didn't know this until months later, so a few days after we arrived, we were cleaning and unpacking. My husband was down in the store covering for his brother, and my mom and I were upstairs cleaning the bedroom. She got tired and decided to go out on the balcony and sit. She took my son with her so I could continue cleaning. Well, I decided to sit down on the bed, and I was faced towards the window looking out. Well, I could see the door leading to the living room out of the corner of my eye. It was halfway open. While I was sitting there, the door opened up, and someone walked into the little bedroom. I heard the door move across the carpet, and I saw out of the corner of my eye someone in a white shirt. I figured it was my mom and thought nothing of it, but then wondered where my son was, and I started to worry why she had left him on the balcony alone. So I called out, and no one answered. I got up and walked across the room and into the little bedroom. I was certain someone would be there, because I had seen someone go in there. Well, I was completely surprised when I walked in there, and no one was in the room. This really startled me. So I walked out into the balcony, and there was my mom and son. I asked if she had went into the room, and Mom just looked at me and said no. And no one but us and my husband were there that day. Another time, I was walking up our stairs to our apartment, and I had a vision flash in front of my face that completely terrified me. I still don't know what it was or why it happened, but it was at night, and I looked to my right at the wall, and there was this horrible face like a gargoyle, just for a second, and then it was gone. The only place I felt really uncomfortable at was the downstairs storage area. I would run past the place. It had a weird feeling to it. Nothing ever happened around there other than that feeling. The other times involved my son. During this time, he developed an imaginary friend. He would call it the baby, or baby sometimes. He would be in the hallway of the kitchen playing, and say, "Oh, come see the babies." Or he would be talking, and I asked him who he was talking to, and he would say the babies. I didn't think anything of it, until my husband told me about his sisters. Then I felt some kind of uncomfortable with it. One day, we were sitting in the living room, and he comes in crying and tells me that the babies are hiding under the bed. Well, I didn't want to look under the bed, but I did anyways, and of course, there wasn't anything there, but it still made the hair on the back of my neck rise up. The only other thing was one day, my husband and I were sitting on the couch and my son was playing on the rug. and we were just talking, and my son looks over into the corner and says, "Look at that man with the cowboy hat on." Well, we didn't see anything, so we just said, "Oh, is there?" And he continues playing with his truck, and we keep talking. Well, about 10 minutes later, my son looks up and says, "Oh, he's gone." I don't know. We had left 6 months later, and were able to come back to the US, and have just experienced all these stories that have occurred. It was weird, to say the least. Later, I was talking to my sister-in-law, a different one, who had grown up there, and I told her about her experiences, and she got really defensive and didn't want to talk about it anymore. So who knows? Thanks for letting me share. I had recently moved from our old apartment. We were visited there by an unknown presence. A couple of years ago, I'd won some haunted dolls I had bidded on. One was a doll owned by a murdered teenager. The obituary article about her murder was included with the doll. This is the one that I think may have brought on much of the phenomena. My sister heard knocking on my bedroom door from the inside. We live in the same apartment. I didn't tell her that I had the haunted dolls until she told me that. Gave more credibility to it that way. I tried to debunk it by saying that I may have knocked on the door while I slept, but she said no. She heard me up, getting ready for work, getting my clothes on out of the drawers. I didn't hear it from the inside though. It happened one more time the next morning, but she asked the spirit to leave, and then it stopped. But other things started to happen. Our music box mysteriously came to life with a full wind, even though it was wound all the way down. It wasn't played for over a year. Then again 2 hours later, again at full music without being wound. Kept playing for several minutes. Also, our kitchen faucet moved from the right to the left overnight. It is hard to move it by hand. If that weren't enough, we had to unplug out of the power strip, and neither her or I unplugged it. It isn't easy to unplug. It was kept plugged in for the pump for the inflatable bed, which had a leak in it and had to be pumped up every couple of hours, so we never unplugged it. Our visitor made sure to make itself known. I remember one night I had so much trouble sleeping. I'm an insomniac, so I often wake up many times during the night. I went to fetch myself a snack, so I got up. The living room leads to the kitchen, so I have to walk through there to get to the kitchen. As I'm walking through the living room, I hear a monstrous laughter erupt, a deep voice saying "ha." It creeped me out for a second. Then I brushed it off and proceeded to the kitchen. I'm now sitting down at the kitchen table and can see the living room from where I'm sitting. The only light I had on was the kitchen, but it was dim enough that I was able to see a dark shadow move from one end of the room to the other. It wasn't my sister, because she was knocked out from rest, so I'm going back to my bedroom. As I'm heading past the living room, there was a window, and the curtains were moving by themselves. There was no wind or open windows, and no AC unit on. Nothing that could have made the window curtains do this. A second after this, I feel a pain on my arm, and female laughter, once again this time. I check to see if my sister is up, but she is still asleep. I dismiss it, and say it's just me and my imagination, so finally get tired enough to sleep when I'm laying down and staring at the ceiling. That's when I see it, a face that looks like a witch, much like the witch from The Wizard of Oz. It appears only for a few seconds, but it really made me paranoid. For some reason, I was able to sleep. How I did so, I can't even say, but I did. When I awoke in the morning, I looked back at my arm, and there was a red imprint of a hand there, as if someone tried to twist my arm. I know it sounds crazy, but I wasn't too afraid, even after all that. I investigate places now and then for people, and I'm very much used to activity. My meter readings some nights were very high in some areas that are usually in the green area on the meter. Many times, I would ask for a sign that it was there, and then it would spike into the red zone. I sort of missed that activity after moving out, but perhaps someday it will return in the new place I moved into. I wanted to share a story with you about something that happened to somebody I knew when I was a young man in Minnesota that always sends chills down my spine. When I was about 12 years old, which would have been 1977, my brother Royce was working in a town named Worthington, Minnesota, about 30 miles from my hometown of Jackson, Minnesota. He worked at a lumber yard called UBC and had a friend that worked at a local grain elevator. The silos for grain elevators in that part of the country rise hundreds of feet into the air and have the capacity to store tons and tons of grain, whether that be corn or soybeans, whatever the silo is being used for at that time. Occasionally, the employees of the elevator climb a ladder on the outside of the silos and get into the silo via an access door at the very top in order to inspect the grain inside, making sure it's not too wet, rotting, or whatever. Inside the access door, there is a catwalk that circles around the entire circumference of the silo. My brother's friend climbed the outside ladder, opened the access door, and lowered himself onto the catwalk that circled the inside of the silo. After walking halfway around the silo on the catwalk, my brother's friend, I don't even recall his name any longer, observed what he thought was an excessive amount of moisture on the surface of the corn, which was what the silo was being used for at the time. So, being an industrious young man, he jumped over the catwalk rail and walked out onto the surface of the corn to roughly the middle of the silo to take a closer look. After inspecting the corn, he decided to just continue his journey across the surface of the corn to get back to the catwalk on the other side of the silo. As the catwalk was a few feet higher than the level of the corn, he had to grab onto the catwalk rail and bounce to get his foot up to the catwalk platform and swing his leg over the rail. As he swung his foot over the rail, he heard a noise behind him. Balancing with one leg over the catwalk rail and one leg on the catwalk platform on the outside of the rail, he turned around to see what the noise was. Much to his horror, the corn that he had just walked across was falling straight down, hundreds of feet to the bottom of the silo, which was cement floor. It landed with a crash a few seconds later. Instead of walking on solid surface of corn, as he had assumed, he had actually walked across a crust of rotten corn that had formed on top of the silo when corn had previously stored in the silo. The remaining corn had been removed from the silo the previous week. He spent a few months sitting on the catwalk, staring down into the depths of the silo, and then silently got up, went out across the access door, made his way back down the ladder on the outside of the silo, and took the rest of the day off. Oh, and the creepiest part yet, when he was heading back to where he was going, he actually saw in the distance a farmer of some sort, but it definitely looked like an apparition. As he was getting closer and closer to the man, who was standing there, almost as if he was lifelessly stoned out of his mind, he disappeared. His face looked so rugged, disfigured, and it looked like he was emanating pure evil. He later awoke in the evening in his own bed to a man choking him out in his sleep. He woke up immediately, and the man was gone. The man, the same guy who we saw, the farmer in the fields. He was described as having the most bulgy red eyes he had ever seen in his life, and the face of evil. Something was going on there, and he couldn't quite place his finger on it, but it was definitely demonic of some sort. That farmer was very protective of the cornfields it seemed that he may have raised himself, although I'm not sure why he even appeared in the first place, in the field, or as a possible sleep paralysis or ghostly encounter at night. Nevertheless, it gave me nightmares for a long time. I've known about this Ghost Stories website for a long time, probably since the late 90s. I don't visit the site too often, probably 3 or 4 times a year, but when I visit it, I enjoy it. Anyway, I wanted to share a couple of stories that kind of dawned on me while reading the site today. While I was reading your site, I remembered some of the experience I had at Paris Island, specifically in the rifle range area. Well, when I searched on the internet for Paris Island haunting, I came across this story. This same event in regards to fire which happened to a friend of mine. He was so spooked that he woke me up early for fire watch duty because he couldn't take it. He saw a figure in the mirror in the bathroom. The difference between his story and the story from the link is that he saw the figure in the mirror, but to him, it looked as if he was in the bathroom. The bathrooms were in the large area we call the squad bay. The drill instructor's office was typically there. My friend had me go in the bathroom, but I didn't see anything. I took over his shift and worked mine. I recall hearing sounds like someone was moving in the bathroom. I checked a few times, but I didn't see anything. If I'm being honest, I was hoping that I would, which is why I didn't mind taking a double shift. My second story is an interesting one, because it was an experience we all witnessed. Again, this was in the same barracks where we stayed for the rifle range. We had all entered the barracks after lunch, and we were all standing in front of our foot lockers as our drill instructor, Sergeant Minix, was yelling at us over something. He was standing right at the door that we always used to enter and exit the barracks. We're on the second floor of the 3-floor unit. Well, while he was yelling, there were 3 distinct knocks on the door. It was the 3 knocks that all recruits had to do in order to approach the drill instructor at his office, or when a recruit has to enter another squad bay. By knocks, they were not traditional knocks on the door, but more like hand slaps against the door. As soon as the 3rd knock was heard, he flung the door open. Now, if someone was standing there, they would have had a door to the face. There was no one there, and there was absolutely no possibility that someone could have jumped out of the way or hid. They would have had to run up or down the stairs, or jump over the railing and taken a very high and nasty fall, and would have been obvious just hearing footsteps. Looked up and down the stairs and said, "Must have been a ghost." It was the time of day where all platoons would have returned to their barracks, so it wasn't some recruit falling behind or a drill instructor late. That just doesn't happen. Paris Island is very orderly in everything. Of all the ghost stories I've heard, I've never read or heard one where a room full of people experienced the same thing.
I read many of the stories on your site and decided to tell one of my own. This is the scariest and most unexplainable thing that has ever happened to me. First, I'll give a little background information. I grew up on a farm in rural South Georgia and spent a great deal of my free time fishing, hunting, and exploring, and always doing this by myself, since there weren't a lot of other kids around and I only had a younger sister. I never really experienced any fear of anything, other than being late for dinner, all the years I was growing up, and I can't recall any paranormal experiences other than the one I'm about to share with you. I had a best friend from school that I started hanging out with after we became old enough to drive and got our trucks, which are required for country boys. For the next 2 years, we did most of our hunting and fishing and troublemaking together. After we graduated from high school, we even went to the same local college and continued to hang out. My granddaddy owned a farm in the same county that we lived in, and I would go deer hunting on his land sometimes, but I had never taken my friend there with me. Behind my grandparents' house were several barns, then several large fields, then a large pond with a swampy area, then a large pasture that stretched from one side of their property to the other, property line to property line. This wooded area was immediately behind the pasture and also encompassed the entire backside of the property. The woods were also enclosed on the back and on each side with a 4-foot tall fence, since cows were allowed into the pasture and wooded area at times. You will soon see why all this detail is important. On the 3 sides of the wooded area were large open fields belonging to the neighbors, with each field belonging to a different neighbor. Take note that there are no more trees or woods close by. During the fall of our first year in college, I had scouted these woods and put up 2 deer stands, one on each side of the property on the property lines, but also very close to active deer trails and signs. These stands were no more than 100 yards apart, and about 150 yards into the woods from the pasture. I decided one weekend to treat my friend to a little hunting paradise, although I had yet to see anything other than squirrels all season long. We went to the woods about 4 p.m., with it being dark by 6. I took him to his stand and then proceeded across the woods to mine. Just after the sun went down, I heard my friend whistle loudly, obviously trying to get my attention. I whistled back. He whistled again as though he didn't hear me. Again, I whistled back, even louder this time. There was no response. About 5 minutes passed, and then I heard him whistle again. But he was closer to me than he should have been, but still through the woods somewhere. I found this very strange, since we were supposed to sit in our stands until after dark, and then meet up in the pasture to walk back out to the house. He whistled again and was even closer, and I could tell that he was almost running, and he started calling out my name. He sounded panicked and was coming straight toward me, although there is no way he could know where the deer stand was, since he had never been there before, and I didn't respond to him until he called my name. I climbed down from the tree stand as he approached, and when I got on the ground, he ran up and said, "We gotta get out of here. Something big is after me." Instead of joining him in the rush, I stood there looking and listening. Sure enough, in a few seconds, it sounded like a bulldozer was coming through the woods, but without the engine. I could hear trees breaking and large bushes being shaken and trampled, and it was coming right at me with the sound becoming deafening, as though it were right on top of us. I started running down the fence headed for the pasture, and realized that my friend had run ahead of me and stopped. When he saw me running, he took off running again. We ran as fast as we could through the woods with the sound of massive destruction right on our heels. As we broke out into the pasture and got about 50 feet from the edge of the woods, the sound stopped. We continued to run until we were halfway across the pasture and turned to look at each other as we ran, both realizing that either we were no longer being chased or there was just nothing to be torn and crushed in the pasture. We both stopped and turned around, dropping to the ground and shouldering our rifles, aiming to kill whatever was behind us. To our amazement, there was nothing there. The daylight was almost gone, causing the woods to appear as nothing more than a black blob. I told my friend to get up and run for the pond while I guarded the rear. Then he would stop and guard the rear while I ran to him. After meeting up again at the pond, we both walked in silence back to my grandparents' house. We got into our separate trucks and drove to our parents' houses, not mentioning the event until many years later. We still remain close friends then and even today, but we still don't know what happened in the woods that night. I did return to those woods a week later by myself, but in the middle of the day. I walked over the entire wooded area and never even saw one broken branch or bush. I walked in the fields around the wooded area and saw no large or unusual footprints. My friend never returned to those woods with me, even though I returned many times day and night, and never again experienced any strange occurrences or sounds. I know there was nothing physical in the woods that night, but whatever it was, I obviously didn't want my friend there, and he got the point loud and clear.
You really want to share, like, and subscribe to this video, and if you are subscribed, you're going to subscribe again. Because, well, I don't even know why. But guys, thank you for tuning in. No, but seriously guys, welcome to another edition of Phantom of Darkness's Haunted Ghost Stories. This time, I'm forming 35 minutes of brand new content. So guys, the first 35 minutes that you actually heard, if you got this far, is brand new stories that I actually recorded. And then the rest I put into a compilation. So you guys are both getting a long video and new stories at the same time. So let me know if you like that idea that I put together, that I assembled. Go ahead and like, share, comment, and subscribe. And let me know in the comment section below of the new stories that you heard, which one you like the most. Love you guys, and I'll see you in the next video.